To this day, Rambo First Blood remains one of my favourite films. I can still vividly remember the moment when Rambo collapses into Troutman's arms, pouring out his overwhelming despair, and how deeply thought-provoking it was to see the Colonel standing there confused and unsure of what to do in that moment, but that was only what we were allowed to see on screen. It wasn't until many years later that the cast finally dared to reveal the astonishing truths that we as audiences back then had absolutely no idea about. Did you know that the understanding between the mentor and his student actually grew out of a fiery confrontation between the stars behind the scenes? Or that the military had to seal off the filming location to hunt down a cache of real weapons that had been stolen? And that Stallone even paid the price with his own ribs just to capture a perfect jump? Let's uncover 15 secrets about Rambo. First Blood told by the cast decades later. 15. Richard Crenna reveals the dark ending that nearly erased a legend. Do you remember the choking emotion when Rambo finally breaks down sobbing as he pours out the pain of a war veteran into the arms of the man who had become his spiritual father? It was a bitter ending, yet one that still carried a faint glimmer of hope. But in the original script and the earliest filmed footage, there was absolutely no redemption at all. According to David Morrell's original novel, Rambo was destined to die. In that buried version, after unleashing all of his rage, Rambo collapses, exhausted and hopeless. Trembling, he grips his rifle tightly, looks straight into Colonel Troutman's eyes and forces the only man he trusts to pull the trigger. A dry gunshot echoes through the silent night. Rambo falls, blood spilling out his eyes, empty, as the light fades from them. The screen cuts to black. No future, no sequel, and certainly no indestructible icon named John Rambo. It was simply the tragic end of a soldier buried by the very society and life he had served. This scene was actually fully filmed, but when it was shown during test screenings, the entire theatre was stunned before erupting in outrage. The audience simply could not accept their hero dying like a wounded animal after everything he had endured. The backlash was so overwhelmingly negative that Sylvester Stallone and the filmmakers were forced to turn around immediately and write a more humane ending. That last-minute decision to change the character's fate not only saved Rambo's life, but also altered the entire course of action movie history. 14. Sylvester Stallone recounts the 3-hour cut that nearly ended up in the trash. I will never forget Stallone's bitter confession when he first watched the rough cut of First Blood. Before it became a masterpiece, the film was once an irredeemable disaster. The first cut ran over 3 hours long, an astonishingly excessive length for an action movie at the time. It was so messy and dragging that even Stallone himself could barely recognise the story of the heroic veteran he had poured his heart into portraying. The pacing was chaotic, the dialogue was bloated and meaningless, and countless repetitive scenes left test audiences exhausted. Stallone, who had bet his already fragile career entirely on this role, became so desperate that he even considered buying back the rights to the film just to prevent it from ever being released. He feared that if the movie reached theatres in that state, it would mark the end of his reputation. But instead of giving up, Stallone did something extraordinary. He locked himself inside the editing room. With the instincts of a sharp storyteller, he began a brutal surgery on his own creation. He cut dozens of minutes of unnecessary footage, stripped away heavy dialogue, and focused entirely on expressions and action. The result was a film under 100 minutes, tight, tense, and bursting with energy. That risky and meticulous work in the editing room transformed a cinematic corpse into an immortal action monument, proving that sometimes the power of a film lies in what you dare to throw away. 13. Ted Kotcheff recalls the day the film set turned into a crime scene. Have you ever wondered why the atmosphere in First Blood feels so raw and tense? Perhaps it's because, in real life, the crew also faced a military-level nightmare. Right in the middle of filming in the town of Hope, British Columbia, an incident shook the entire media world at the time. A truck filled with prop weapons from machine guns and rifles to pistols was broken into and completely emptied. The stolen arsenal was worth around $50,000, but the security implications were far more alarming. The most frightening detail was that the weapons had been guarded by real soldiers, yet the thieves still managed to pull off the theft almost miraculously. Overnight, the peaceful film set in Hope turned into a serious crime scene. Police launched a large-scale investigation. Headlines exploded across newspapers, and a cloud of anxiety hung over the entire production. To keep the project from being shut down, the Canadian military had to step in and guard what remained. From that point on, the film set practically became a real military encampment with soldiers and armed patrols present around the clock. Stallone later joked that the film's prop arsenal was probably protected more heavily than an actual military base. Ironically, this strange blend of fiction and reality only intensified the tension captured in every scene of the movie. 12. Kirk Douglas speaks for the first time about the role of Colonel Troutman. Every time I watch Richard Crenna's calm presence and compassionate eyes as Colonel Sam Troutman, I can't help but wonder what would the character have been like if he had carried the face of the legendary Kirk Douglas. Originally, the role of Rambo's spiritual father had been tailor-made for Douglas, but behind the scenes, a fierce ideological battle was brewing. Kirk Douglas did not want a version of the story in which Rambo survived. He insisted on staying faithful to the original novel, where Rambo must be shot and killed as the inevitable conclusion to his rebellion. The conflict escalated when Douglas repeatedly demanded changes to the dialogue and tried to intervene in the script to push that ending. Stallone and the filmmakers strongly opposed the idea because they believed Rambo was a victim and victims deserved to live. The dispute became so intense that only a few days before filming began, Kirk Douglas abruptly walked away from the project. In the middle of the chaos and facing the risk of total collapse, Richard Crenna was called in as a last-minute replacement. With almost no preparation time, he stepped directly onto the set. Yet that fateful replacement created a version of Troutman who was not rigid or harsh, but dignified and compassionate, an embodiment of authority balanced with humanity. That portrayal became the second soul of the film, something Kirk Douglas may have unintentionally lost by holding too firmly to his own vision. 11. Sylvester Stallone regrets the cliff jump and the pain that bled through. There is a very thin line between a great actor and a legend, and Sylvester Stallone crossed that line with his own flesh and blood. You certainly remember the breathtaking scene where Rambo is cornered with no way out and is forced to leap off a towering cliff. Many people still assume it was done with special effects or performed by a stunt double. But the truth is that Stallone refused nearly every layer of safety protection. He once said, a line that has since become part of behind-the-scenes legend: "If Rambo has to suffer pain, then I have to suffer that pain too." When the cameras started rolling, Stallone hurled himself down the steep drop. He slammed violently into large tree branches before crashing hard onto the rigid ground below. The terrifying impact broke several of the actors' ribs on the spot. Yet instead of shouting for the scene to be cut, Stallone clenched his teeth and endured the pain to finish the sequence. The gasping breaths, the strained grimace, and the fading look in Rambo's eyes on screen were not acting at all. They were real. Pain, real bones cracking under the strain. That moment did more than create one of the most visceral action scenes in film history. It proved that Stallone wasn't merely playing Rambo, he was Rambo. 10. Sylvester Stallone, the last survivor on a list of superstars. When you look at Stallone's powerful physique and brooding face, it is hard to imagine anyone else wearing the jacket of John Rambo. But the truth is that Stallone was never the first choice. He was actually far behind a long line of Hollywood's biggest names at the time. The list of actors once considered for the role was staggering, including legends such as Clint Eastwood, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and even Steve McQueen. Each of them had their own unique style, yet one by one they turned the role down for different reasons. Some thought the story was too violent, others simply didn't believe in the script's potential. Perhaps fate had arranged it that way, allowing every one of those giants to walk away so that destiny could eventually call Sylvester Stallone's name. At that moment in his career, Stallone desperately needed a defining role after the success of Rocky. He didn't just accept the part, he poured his entire soul and the experiences of a man who had once been rejected into the character. The refusals of those Hollywood titans inadvertently opened the door for a new legend to be born, transforming a role that nearly went abandoned into a global pop culture icon. 9. Sylvester Stallone, the broken nose punch and the brutal truth inside the police station. There are moments in cinema when the line between performance and reality disappears entirely because of an unexpected accident. I have always been haunted by the scene in which Rambo explodes with fury inside the police station when the pain of humiliation awakens the survival instincts of a wild beast. While filming this chaotic fight sequence, Sylvester Stallone fully immersed in the character's frenzied state of mind threw a punch with far more force than intended. Instead of glancing past his target as choreographed, the punch landed squarely on the face of the stunt performer opposite him. A sharp crack echoed through the set as the unfortunate actor's nose broke instantly. The scream of agony that followed was never written in the script. It was the real reaction of a body that had just suffered a serious injury. Rather than stopping the scene, the director decided to keep the footage. That accidental brutality gave the sequence a terrifying level of realism, allowing audiences to truly feel the destructive power of a soldier pushed to the absolute edge. 8. Sylvester Stallone, the first Hollywood star to conquer China. Have you ever wondered how a deeply American film like First Blood could become a cultural phenomenon in a distant and vastly different country like China in the 1980s? In 1982, the film achieved an extraordinary milestone when it became the first Hollywood movie to be widely screened across the country. This was not just an ordinary film release, it was a cultural earthquake. Movie theaters were packed and people lined up in long queues just to witness the story of a lone man fighting against overwhelming odds. For Chinese audiences at the time, Rambo was not simply an American action hero. He became a symbol of survival, of individual strength rising from the ashes. Overnight, the name Sylvester Stallone was no longer confined to Hollywood. It exploded onto the world stage as a global superstar. This unexpected success opened the gates for Western cinema to enter the Asian market, while also turning Rambo into an immortal figure that transcended language and political boundaries. 7. The Canadian Army, when the National Guard gear was 100% real. The biggest difference between First Blood and other action films of its era lies in the sheer grittiness of its visuals. You won't find plastic props or fake military hardware here. To save money while still ensuring absolute authenticity, the filmmakers made a bold decision. They borrowed real military equipment directly from the Canadian Army's storage depots. From worn military uniforms and troop transport trucks to communication equipment, everything had once been used in real field operations. This explains why whenever we see the National Guard units chasing Rambo on screen, we can feel the heaviness, roughness, and intimidation of an actual military force. The presence of these real-world items created the perfect foundation, making John Rambo's story feel less like pure entertainment and more like a vivid documentary about the clash between a lone individual and an enormous war machine. It was precisely this almost obsessive attention to detail in the production design that allowed the film to retain its visual power even after more than 4 decades. 6. David Morrell. The brutal ending in the original novel. If you think the film version was already tragic, then revisit the first manuscript pages written by author David Morrell. In the original 1972 novel, John Rambo never had any chance of surviving to become a hero in later installments. The brutality of war and the trauma of its aftermath had turned him into a ticking time bomb. And in the final chapter, Rambo is essentially ready to turn himself into a living explosive to bring everything to an end. In a haunting scene, Colonel Troutman, the man who created this war machine, is forced to destroy it with his own hands. Troutman uses a hunting rifle to shoot Rambo, an act that is both punishment and a painfully merciful release. No one wins in this battle. Rambo dies, and Sheriff Teasle also breathes his last due to severe injuries. Their deaths stand as a powerful condemnation of the futility of violence. When adapting the story for the film, Stallone fought hard to change this ending because he wanted to give war veterans a path forward, a chance to reintegrate into life rather than being erased from the world in the tragic manner described in the novel. 5. Dan Hill, The Ballad. It's a Long Road and the Melody of Loneliness. I will never forget the feeling when the first notes of the song It's a Long Road begin to play, as Rambo slowly walks into the darkness at the end of the film. It is not a victory song, but a melancholy ballad about loneliness. Performed with Dan Hill's deeply reflective voice, the song captures the entire life of Rambo, a road that stretches endlessly ahead, filled with hardship, and seemingly without a final destination. The melody became so haunting that it quickly turned into the soul of the entire film series. Whenever the horns and strings rise, audiences can almost feel the chill of the British Columbia mountains and the silent pain within the heart of a soldier abandoned by the world. It's a Long Road is not merely part of the soundtrack. It became a shared memory for an entire generation. It transformed the image of Rambo from a violent man into a flesh and blood human being, someone desperately searching for a way home, yet constantly pushed back into the shadows by the weight of his past. 4. Jimmy Lyle, the legendary knife and an immortal symbol of survival. In the world of cinema, there are props that transcend their original purpose and become cultural symbols, and Rambo's knife is perhaps the perfect example. Designed by legendary knife maker Jimmy Lyle, the weapon was originally intended in the script as nothing more than a survival tool. But in Lyle's hands, it became a powerful work of craftsmanship featuring a razor-sharp serrated blade and a survival kit hidden inside its hollow handle. The appearance of this knife in First Blood sparked an unprecedented global craze. After the film's release, countless replicas of the Rambo knife flooded the market, ranging from children's toys to expensive collector's items. For audiences at the time, owning such a knife meant owning a piece of John Rambo's strength and relentless survival instinct. Even today, after many sequels and different versions of the knife, Jimmy Lyle's original design remains an irreplaceable icon, reminding us of an era when action heroes needed nothing more than their bare hands and a sharp blade to stand against the entire world. 3. Ted Kotcheff, the comedy director who shaped a tragedy. There is an intriguing paradox in film history that few people notice. The man behind the darkest and most suffocating moments of First Blood was actually a director best known for comedy. Before taking on this project, director Ted Kotcheff was primarily recognized for light-hearted and humorous films. Few could have imagined that the humanistic perspective and psychological sensitivity of a comedy filmmaker would transform a straightforward action script into a tragic epic about the pain of life after war. Ted Kotcheff did not approach Rambo as a mindless, muscular superhero. Instead, he delved deeply into the loneliness, fear, and sense of betrayal experienced by a broken human being. He paid meticulous attention to every camera angle, from haunting close-ups of Stallone's haunted eyes in the depths of the forest to the tense silence that filled the film's quiet conversations. It was precisely this remarkable transformation by Kotcheff that allowed First Blood to escape the label of a simple B-grade action movie and become a film with emotional depth, one that leaves audiences reflecting long after they have left the theatre about the true cost of war. 2. John Rambo, the killer who never intentionally killed anyone. If you watch First Blood carefully, you will discover a shocking truth that completely contradicts the blood-soaked gunman image often associated with Rambo in the later films. Throughout the entire runtime of the first movie, John Rambo never intentionally kills anyone. He fights, he attacks, and he destroys property, but everything he does is purely in self-defense or to disable his pursuers so he can escape. The only death in the film is that of the aggressive deputy sheriff Galt, and it is entirely accidental. Galt falls from the helicopter while trying to shoot Rambo from above. Stallone and the filmmakers made a deliberate and careful choice to keep Rambo's hands from being directly stained with blood. The intention was to reinforce a powerful message. Rambo is not a cold-blooded murderer. He is simply a man desperately trying to survive in a world that seems determined to destroy him. This subtle detail became one of the film's most important distinctions, allowing audiences to stand on Rambo's side and sympathize with the suffering of a warrior pushed to the edge yet still holding on to the last remnants of his humanity. 1. Sylvester Stallone, from a $15 million gamble to a $160 million monument. We end this list with a number that perfectly illustrates the power of belief and perseverance. In 1982, First Blood began production with a relatively modest budget of around $15 million, a risky figure for a project that had already faced numerous obstacles in both its script and casting. At the time, many people in Hollywood even predicted that the film would become the graveyard of Sylvester Stallone's career after several disappointing projects. But when the film finally reached theaters, it exploded into an unprecedented success. With a global box office of more than $160 million, the movie not only generated profits more than 10 times its production cost, but also officially turned John Rambo into a billion-dollar cinematic franchise in the decades that followed. From a project that was once nearly destroyed in the editing room, First Blood rose to become an immortal legend, cementing Stallone's status as an A-list superstar and redefining what modern action films could be. It stands as powerful proof that a sincere story told with blood, sweat, and tears will always find its way into the hearts of audiences around the world. Looking back at the journey of First Blood, we can see that it was never just an action movie filled with explosions and spectacle. It was a real struggle to protect the soul of a character. Rambo is not merely a warrior, he is a reminder of forgotten pain and the strength of the human will to survive. A film that began amid behind-the-scenes disasters ultimately became an immortal monument in the hearts of millions of viewers for more than 4 decades. Do you remember the first time you watched Rambo? Which moment in the film stayed with you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next behind the scenes journeys.